Hello, and welcome to the Cat and Sam Show. We're here with Joe today, and I thought maybe we talk a little bit, or we talked a little bit about maybe talking about feelings and identifying the way we feel as a self instead of worrying about others. What are your thoughts on that, you two?
Well, I would love to. I thought Johanna said something fantastic in the last video about the importance of the acknowledgement and or denial of something that's been traumatic for you. And obviously this is a tactic of domestic abusers, is they deny, or that they deny your feelings, they minimize it. Or they can even tell you that you're mad for thinking it, whether anything actually happened or not. But the dismissing and invalidating of your natural response to somebody being either abusive or violent or just downright horrible or whatever to you. And, that's one of the things that comes out later on and is so key if you do survive and get away, is that acknowledgement from outside, but also then I think in yourself that this did actually happen is so critical. And it can be hard to acknowledge that at the beginning because you've been told so often that you're just bonkers. That can be quite a hard process.
I wonder if, Joe, if when you have a client come in and they're in an abusive relationship, how you treat them differently than somebody who is maybe out of that situation in looking at them, because I tend to look at people very differently depending on where they are in their growth, because I think they don't even understand what they're in.
One, I don't do psychotherapy, so that's a little different. And when they come into my office, but I really try to have them, recognize their situation. I try to get them connected with resources if I can, encourage them to safely get out of that relationship, if they're even able or even allowed to come see me, because that's an issue too.
Right. That's so true.
I've had people secretly come to see me and secretly get put on medications because their partner does not agree with it. And so it's really difficult to try to get them connected and get them to the point where they feel brave enough that they can make that separation.
I'm glad you're speaking that way, because it is so complicated in people just think you can open the door and walk out. It's really not that easy.
And by law, if I'm told that there's any abuse happening anywhere, by law, I have to report that. And that is something also that I have to make known to my clients when they come in and they are going to share these details with me, that I am obligated by law.
And was that even in the hospital, when you go into the hospital as well?
I can imagine that puts some people off actually telling you what's really going on for them, which must make your job really hard in terms of being able to help them.
Absolutely.
It always amazes me so much how complex everything is. It just seems not to be, but I'm extremely analytical, so I look at things and I just kind of break them down. And what at the beginning we were talking about, like we're socialized to ask everybody else how they feel, and we're not really taught how do I feel about this, or what do I think about this, and What are some of your thoughts about that as far as like,
I think
just in general, not necessarily your practice, but just in general?
That, and even based on my own experience, knowing it in here, how I feel, what the situation is, I can do that and keep it to myself, right? But having to say it out loud to somebody else, I think there's a lot of fear, a lot of vulnerability, and that keep people from saying it out loud and really, because saying it out loud makes it real, right?
Right, exactly.
And we don't want it to be real. We don't want it to be what it is.
And so there has to be some acknowledgement of, yeah, that's very true.
So
what you've been through and how that stacks up.
Sorry, I interrupted you there, Kat. So, how? Because obviously, so that vulnerability. What kind of things can we do then to start maybe lessening feeling so vulnerable in communicating how we feel or what we feel, rather than just keeping it? Do you have any little tips and tactics to
I think if we recognize this in a friend or an acquaintance, that they may be in this situation and they are afraid to speak it out loud, is just letting them know that you're there, that you're supportive, that you're wanting to listen and to hear them. And I think that's important. And building that trust and rapport with them is going to help them feel comfortable in sharing that information.
And what can we do ourselves to help that as well? So if we're feeling vulnerable, to start taking those baby steps, do you know what I mean? Those little kind of like...
Sometimes it has to be a plunge.
Well, I mean, I think about Brené Brown, because we all like Brené Brown and her talks about vulnerability. Do you know who Brené Brown is, Sam?
I don't know.
Oh my God, I haven't introduced her to Brené Brown.
I've got some homework to do.
I'm not a very good friend.
She's got some great TED Talks, and she's got a special on Netflix as well.
Okay.
And I think there's, is it on
Yeah,
HBO, Kat? The other one?
Yeah, it's on HBO Max. Atlas of the Heart is a great book. But she talks about people think that you can just have courage, just use courage. But you have to be vulnerable to have courage. You have to understand that there is a wound that you might have happened to you if you step out. And, you kind of have to be, I really think, this building of the I and the self is important, because at some point you come to a point where you're just like, I'm just going to go. I'm done. And you're done, and you're gone. But it is a giant step. Any thoughts?
Well, I'm going to have to look at Brené Brown, but for me as well, it's not just about the leaving, it's the rebuilding afterwards. We've been trained so much to not voice that actually it can be really scary to say to somebody, no, I don't want to do that, because we're not used to doing it. So even when we've left with everybody else in our lives, sometimes it can be, or we're in situations where we're a bit triggered, say, that relearning or reflexing that muscle where that vulnerability is lessened. I was just sort of thinking if there was any kind of, like you've said to me before, Kat, about saying no, just say no. Try practicing, it's like, are things like just saying no to somebody in a shop queue is as you're sort of reintegrating into normal, non-abusive life. Are things like that helpful? to start people building up their own confidences.
I think that when we start to ask ourselves, how do I feel? And check in with ourselves on how do I feel? And where is it connected in the body? Which is, I think, what Jo is talking about with her practice and giving medicine. Medicine helps so that you're maybe not that intense in your feeling about something, so that you can get past that a little bit. But you still need to do talk therapy and other therapies. That there's plenty out there to help you continue that path. So medicine's great in that arena. I also want to hit on something else a bit, which I don't think people should be fearful about going to their doctors. It's not like the doctors are going to go out and, the police are going to be at your house when you get home. It's just documented, which I think is helpful in a lot of ways. I think if it's children, it's a different issue, I'm sure, but adults, I don't know. I just don't think people should be afraid of going to see.
Nor ashamed.
To help them. It is.
Yeah, nor ashamed of it. That.
Yeah.
And I think maybe for some as well in a domestic abuse situation, it's like if you do go to the doctors for help and they do give you medicine because you've been traumatized by the abuse that happened to you, in a way, sometimes that can feel like it's confirming what the abuser said about you, which was that you were mad. So, I think the practitioners being aware that can sometimes be why people push back against that kind of medical help or intervention, is because in our minds it's just confirming it's the same outcome, but there's a different reason and intent behind it, and maybe we're not always clear about that, and it's so shameful. We're so full of shame anyway that to add that to the mix can be so difficult, I think. Do you? Or is that just me?
No, you're right on. Shame, feeling shameful about being in the situation that you're allowing yourself to stay in, or your children to stay in. Getting other people to know, having to go to a doctor to say, I need something, and explain to them, in the very least, what might be going on at home. There's a lot of shame in that. And you're right. I think it, in the victim's mind, it's confirming that what their abuser has been pounding into them, that there's something wrong with them. It's them, and that's the issue.
But we're here to say that that's not right. And go and see your doctor.
That is not fact.
Well, it's so funny because you're not the only doctor that person in the medical field that's come out. It's so prevalent. I think I was talking to a doctor and she said, I said, well, you ask people if they're afraid at home, and you ask them right in front of their abuser, like they're going to tell you, yes, I'm afraid at home, right in front of their abuser. And she said, well, I take them out into the hallway and ask them. And I said to the abusers on the other side, how does that help? It's so convoluted as far as, you're dealing with somebody who's frightened and for a lot of reasons. I feel
like a client isn't being forthcoming with me, I will actually ask their partner or parent even to leave the room so that I can interview the individual alone.
But I mean, how far do you feel like you get with that? Do you feel like you get a little bit further, or do you feel like it just depends on, I'm sure it just depends on the individual.
But I feel that the individual that's in my office that is needing help feels more comfortable to be honest with me about what's going on with them.
Yeah, because they're probably really hurting by the time that you see them, to where you might get into it, you might be able to get in somewhere. It's interesting. I'm always just kind of amazed by the fact that people have to live like this, and we don't really openly talk about it. It's one of the reasons I started talking about it, because it broke my heart to think that people are out here feeling like nobody cares, because society is like, just leave, just get out, just do this, just do that, because they have all the answers and they can't even make laws about it. So, I mean, over in the UK, they have a law, they have coercive control laws, and they can't even bring them to charge. But I did get something the other day about somebody who was afraid that their spouse was going to call on them because of that law. So, I mean, it's a little bit better than not having it, I guess. Mm-hmm. But it really does make for a dangerous situation for everyone. Even the police trying to go into those situations where there's a domestic, it's like the worst thing that they can go into, because they never know what it's going to be.
Well, I mean, we have got a situation at the moment where we're hoping that there are some cases over here. There's a case over here involving another police officer who's a perpetrator with multiple women over 20 years. And it does seem to have got it to the level now where people can't ignore it anymore, But one of the things that I'm also really interested in is the thing around. So, Jo, you were saying you also deal with veterans. And I think there's an understanding around veterans that it takes a considerable amount of time to rebuild, or it can do, but that there is hope, that you can get treatment. There's an understanding and an empathy around that of trauma. And what I find interesting is the same tactics that are used in prisoner of war camps are used by perpetrators in domestic abuse. And yet we don't afford the victim survivors of domestic abuse the same understanding, the same empathy, the same time to recover. It's like, you've left, so you managed to escape, so now you've just got to get back to normal. What do you mean you've got anxiety? Or your mental health is suffering? You've left them now, and I'd really like to see the same. And I think it's coming. I do think it's coming. It's not all negative. Of an understanding that it does take time to recover. That recovery isn't a 24-hour thing. That it isn't shameful. Actually, it's really proactive. It's really positive. And that even if it does take a long time, and even if you never get back to who you were before, you can be a much stronger, healthier you. And it goes in increments. So you might not go from A to B like a rocket, but that doesn't mean the journey itself isn't a good, positive journey. Do you know what I mean? But I don't know if that's me just being a bit naive.
No, I think Jo can talk a lot about that in as long as she's been in.
Say that again, Kat. I can.
Army. I was just going to say that I think you can talk a lot about that as being in the Army, because of seeing the difference, how people were treated years ago comparative to what they're treated now, as far as the post-traumatic stress disorder that in the services.
Yeah, I think there's still stigma, unfortunately, within the military to admit that there's anything going on with you mentally or emotionally. There's still a fear that if they go to get help for depression or anxiety, that they're having, that this is going to affect their career in some way. And so we still get soldiers, active duty service members across the board that hesitate to get help. I was a nurse case manager for the Warrior Transition Battalion at Fort Stewart, and my job there was to help service members through the medical board process. And I had to encourage a lot of my soldiers on my caseload, like, don't hold on to this information now. You need to share this, what's going on with you now, because when you get to the VA system and you feel like if they medically retire you and now you're in the VA system, to try to go back and say, I have traumatic, I had a traumatic experience and now I have PTSD. This is what's going on with me. It's hard to get that to be seen and get that diagnosis and get the help you need for that once you're out. So I always encourage them, start. If you're having it now, say it now. You can get help. We have help in the military, active duty side. We're not going to push you out because you have some anxiety or depression. It's not that simple. We will help you, and it's not going to affect your career. I mean, if they're to the point where they are, suicidal and they're not able to carry a weapon, then there's things that are put in place. And if they get to a point where they can never hold a weapon again because the risk of safety towards themselves or anyone else is an issue, then yes, because, coming in the military, regardless of what our job assignment is, we're a soldier first and we're required to carry a weapon. So that rolls around in their head. Like, if I'm so depressed and I'm feeling suicidal and I'm not allowed to have a weapon, I can't be here. And this is the only way that I take care of myself and my family and those kinds of things.
There's some really interesting correlations, actually, between the soldiers in that situation and being in a domestic abuse situation. If you swap the gun, if you swap the weapon out for something else, but the background, those feelings of like, I'll keep it in because actually I've got to keep, look after my children. I've got to keep a roof over my head. If I say that I'm suffering, are my children going to be taken away from me and put in social care? Or that's really fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, it's almost kind of that. And I hate to say it, but it's kind of like an abusive relationship that a soldier has within the military, is that if they're seen to be weak or vulnerable or something like that, they won't be able to stay in. They'll lose their position. They'll lose their way of supporting themselves, their families.
Their identity, almost.
Identity. Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing. My head's like.
Yeah, no,
I just never thought of, I never thought of it that way. I obviously have a lot of compassion for people in the military, and, I knew there was a stigma in going forward, but, I never put the pieces together. And thanks for sharing that, because I think that's just, helps in so many ways with people to understand that it's just difficult. These relationships are just difficult. And I think the more that we talk about them, the better it is. So I think, we'll wind this one down and we'll see you on the other side. It's been a joy having you here.
Absolutely. It's been fabulous.
Bye.
Now, if you like our content, please comment, like, subscribe, share, and if you want to see some more, you have to hit that bell down there below. So you can check us out on Patreon or on your favourite podcast servers, providers, whatever. So we would like to see you there if you'd like to see us.